Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Wikileaks strikes again. On full display are the CIA's spy tools and methods. Snowden provided a briefing book on U.S. surveillance, but the CIA leaks could provide the blueprints. And your Samsung TV and iPhone are a big part of this. CrossTalking Wikileaks' latest release. I'm joined by my guest, Larry Johnson in Washington. He's a managing partner for Berg Associates and a former CIA analyst and a U.S. State Department counterterrorism official. In New York, we have Suzanne Nossel. She is the executive director of PEN America. And in Phoenix, we cross to Patrick Henningsen. He is a journalist, writer, and founder of the news website 21stCenturyWire.com. All right, folks, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Patrick, if I can go to you first in Phoenix, you got up earliest for this program. What do you make of this WikiLeaks release? Because, you know, over the last couple of days, I've been monitoring it in mainstream media, and it's being relatively downplayed, I would say, considering the magnitude of this story here. The usual, you know, Assange is a traitor, he's a bad guy. They don't want to talk about the content so much. And what kind of oversight the CIA had to do this? Were they trying to build their own NSA? Why did they let these consumer products have so many vulnerabilities? I guess the obvious answer is because they wanted to be able to spy. I mean, this is a big deal. And all they're doing is raising their hands, say, oh, it's terrible, this leak, but not talking about the leaks themselves. And it looks like they're just beginning. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I think one of the big revelations from this is we now know that, you know, we essentially have two agencies, the NSA and the CIA. And the CIA has constructed a sort of an NSA-type body. Essentially, they're doing the same thing. The only difference is, you know, one of these theoretically has oversight, maybe the NSA, and one of them doesn't, the CIA. So this is done completely in the shadows. And worse than that, we find out as well the level to which the CIA is able to sort of outsource certain jobs to GCHQ in Britain, for instance. So that sort of gives them deniability. It doesn't put their fingerprints directly on any operation. But more than that, say in the current political context, it sort of it's about time we give credit where credit's due. All the limelight's been on Russia for all their sort of nefarious hacking abilities, theoretically anyway. And right now we can see, you know, who the top hacker in the world is, and the scope of the operation is just unbelievable. And you know, all nations hack. Russia hacks. China hacks. Everybody hacks. Intelligence services wouldn't be doing their job if they weren't hacking. However, they're not in the same league as the United States. And we have to not forget the CIA does fall under the purview of the federal government. I think it's spoken in the media like it's some sort of separate body, autonomous unto itself. It should fall under some kind of oversight in a progressive democracy.
Well, hopefully that's going to be done. Suzanne, if I can go to you in New York, what do you make of all this? Because the issue of oversight is very important here. It doesn't appear that they are answering to anyone about these programs here, which they certainly should be. And again, I want to stress here is that they knowingly allowed products to go out there that have vulnerabilities, and this kind of information apparently was being passed around, these secrets, for a little while. Quite a few people had access to it, and now, because of leaks, everybody has it right now, and these vulnerabilities can be taken advantage by other people here. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I don't know that it's the responsibility of the intelligence agencies to ensure that products don't go out into the marketplace with vulnerabilities. And I think a lot of these vulnerabilities were known about. Some of them, we understand, were already patched. You know, they date back years to prior versions of the software behind these devices and platforms. So it's not entirely clear how many of these methods are still in active use. I mean, certainly it's a very potent reminder that we do not enjoy security and privacy on our devices, that the notion that these are the equivalent of, a diary or a lockbox is just false, that passwords offer us secure protection. That's false. And so consumers, Americans, people around the world have had to recalibrate how they think about their devices, their communications, their emails, social media activity, knowing that we don't really know who may be looking over our shoulders or how. I mean, the idea that a television, even when turned off, can be a listening device is something out of a James Bond movie, but I don't think anybody would have imagined that there's a particular brand. If you happen to buy the wrong brand, you might be subject to that kind of surveillance.
Larry, we all agree here, and I'm sure our viewers too, that you do need to have security and you need to have these kind of intelligence programs. But the problem here is, and Patrick mentioned it a little bit earlier, at least he alluded to it, is that this kind of vulnerabilities in which you can spy on people can be used for political reasons. And we can think of the situation with General Flynn, for example, when you have intelligence operatives that can get information and use it against your political foes. And, and particularly if it's the government using it against American citizens or someone that was going to assume a government position here. And I think that's the real concern here, is that you can blackmail people, you can threaten them, because you can spy on them so easily. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, what we have is a national security infrastructure in the United States that's basically still a 1948 model, has not caught up to the technological changes that have occurred, because the original incarnation of the National Security Agency was back in an era where you were looking at intercepting radio signals and then telephone signals, but those telephones, you were tapping into wires. You were literally wiretapping. It was dependent upon something physical that you had to have contact with in order to start listening in on other people. So it was not easy to just go through the air and penetrate. Now what we have are with the advent of wireless and the development of computers and smartphones, that suddenly the ability to have privacy in your own home has disappeared. Again, the notion was that the government had to go get a warrant to physically come into your house to search and to look for evidence of some crime. Now they're supposed to get a warrant, but they don't even have to physically break into your house. They can cross over. And so the lack of accountability in the system, and it's so powerful, it's not bound by any kind of geographic border. I mean, remember in the past, some of the big intelligence operations were, when the CIA was climbing into a tunnel in Berlin to literally plug into a cable that was going to the Soviet embassy, or tapping underwater phone lines that cables that were laid. We're well past that, and nobody's thought through how do you bring accountability to that system.
Well, Patrick, here, I guess the concern is here too. Governments spy on governments all the time. I mean, that's time immemorial here. But I guess the real concern is if there's no oversight here in these programs that we're just beginning to learn about. I mean, was there any oversight making sure that they wouldn't be tapping into American citizens and on their devices as well? I mean, the law is the CIA shouldn't be doing that here. Now, if they're doing things that are so opaque and possibly without a mandate, possibly illegal, what stops us to think that they might be doing that on a global scale, including American citizens?
Yeah, we're kind of at an epoch right now, technologically, where technology has actually eclipsed the law, as it were. So, in terms of, like, say, asking for a FISA court order, you actually don't need a FISA court order, because the data or maybe the intelligence or the information is sitting there on someone's desk, and all you need to do is go and look at it. So, do you need a FISA not to gather, but to go look at something? Constitutionally, there's no expectation of any sort of rights or privacies. This is a huge problem. I think what Susan alluded to earlier, saying we shouldn't expect any security with any of our devices. That may be true, but what does this say about our society? In my view, and others, maybe American society is in a kind of a dark place at the moment, where what's most concerning about this leak is the lack of concern.
Yeah.
Students would be, young people would be the people you'd expect to be out protesting about this, because they use their devices, they love their devices. But what are they doing at Middlebury College in Vermont? They're protesting in favor of more censorship on campus. We're at a very strange place liberty-wise in the American culture right now. That's, to me, is the most concerning thing now.
Susan, if I can go back to you in New York, the other thing I think we have to be really worried about is that you have the directorate that controls this kind of these cyber tools, and this is presumably where the leak came from. I mean, so these are the people that are supposed to be guarding the secrets, but that's where the leak, or maybe a contractor related to the directorate, leaked it as well. I mean, it's really interesting. We saw what happened to Bradley. Are these people or individual willing to go through that again? I mean, these people are brazen. Go ahead.
Well, I think that's true. We don't know who leaked this. I mean, one thing I do want to come back on is you mentioned General Flynn. I mean, in that case, as you've said, the idea that there is interception and wiretapping, or the modern equivalent of conversations with foreigners in this country, that's nothing new. So I don't think that particular example really goes to the question of intrusions on to American citizens and their devices. As to the question of leakers, it clearly is an ongoing problem that our government has to face, and the measures that they put in place, subsequent to the Chelsea Manning disclosures, subsequent to the Edward Snowden disclosures, clearly have not put a stop to this. We don't know how these methods are being used, whether they're being used in a warrantless way. I mean, these methods that have been disclosed over the past week, from what I understand, are not dragnet surveillance. These are not massive data sets that the government is able to collect and then sift and sort to find keywords, names of suspects and the like, and then trace a trail of contacts to get a list of those who are associated with potentially unsavory or dangerous individuals. This is different. These are techniques where if they identify somebody who is a person under suspicion, they have a range of sophisticated methods beyond what had been previously realized in order to tap in and invade that person's communications. But whether that's been used without a warrant, we don't know.
I have to go to a hard break here. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on WikiLeaks' latest release. Stay with our team.
E é ruim é porque quando eu vou pra escola tem polícia aqui, bandido aqui.
Sai da rua, volta! Os nossos mortos têm voz!
Isso foi um crime bárbaro, um crime horroroso. O que ele cometeu com meu filho, ele vai ter que pagar.
As ações foram encontrados 7 corpos no interior da comunidade, mas não foram decorrência, até onde a gente tem informações de confronto entre forças policiais.
Tem vergonha?
The city of Minamisoma was hit the hardest by the 2011 tsunami. But it was damaged mostly by the radiation after the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
もともと何もない田舎町で何の魅力もないとこだったけど、まあお魚が取れて山があったから山の山菜とかも取れたけども。
Decontamination is not complete, but many locals could not leave their houses and farms.
最初私が避難したんだ。本当は私はやっぱ動物を置いていけないし、避難しないって言ったら父にめちゃくちゃ怒られて。
They stay strong like their ancestors centuries ago did.
こういう 涙の生活だよ、朝から晩まで、もう楽しいとか嬉しいとかそんなこと、一度もないよ。
Will their wounded souls find a way to rebuild their lives in the wounded landscape?
Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lambell. To remind you, we're discussing WikiLeaks' latest release. Okay, I'd like to go back to Larry in Washington here. I want to go back to the Flynn example here because I think it is germane because he was a private citizen. Yes, he was talking to a foreigner, and I can understand why U.S. intelligence wants to know what foreign diplomats are doing in America. That's perfectly fair. But Flynn was a private citizen, and his involvement in that telephone conversation was leaked, and that is illegal. His rights were violated. Right. And, you know, this is the reason why I'm bringing it up. And Patrick started with here. We have the NSA that has a mandate to do these kinds of things, and there are certain laws and regulations they have to follow. We didn't know about this with the CIA, and so if they don't have the kind of oversight that we don't know about, and it hasn't been released, then the rules don't apply to them. And that's why I worry there could be a lot of Flynns in the future. All right? Go ahead, Larry.
Well, it's one thing that a conversation of the Russian ambassador was intercepted. You can say that's normal, but I think the Russian ambassador knows that that's a likely possibility. So therefore, the Russian ambassador would never be discussing anything sensitive, classified, or nefarious over an unclassified line, number one. Number two, even if it's intercepted by U.S. intelligence, the rules are when you have an American citizen, you don't identify who that American citizen is unless there is evidence of wrongdoing or some possible criminal activity, at which point then there's a process that you go through, what they call minimization, and to get permission to expose who that American citizen is. That's not what happened in this case. In fact, the New York Times reported that this information was taken to the White House and, quote, briefed to the White House, which means Barack Obama was told about it. Now, Barack Obama is a constitutional scholar, allegedly, so he should have right off the bat said, whoa, stop. You know, what is the probable cause here for allowing you to identify an American citizen other than the fact that, you know, they view him as a political enemy? And that's what's so dangerous about this is what we're seeing is that the CIA does now have the capability to operate domestically, and they can use the cover of that they're operating against terrorist target overseas, but it can spill over so easily into the domestic arena, and that without proper oversight can be used against political opponents.
You know, Patrick, one of the first things I thought of after reading details of the first release of leaks here from WikiLeaks is that, you know, this attribution technology they have. They can hack somebody and they can put somebody else's fingerprints on it, and then, you know, you create a real dust storm right there. And you know where I'm going with this here. After 6 months of, you know, Russian hacking of our election, when no evidence has been produced whatsoever, even a number of reports have come out that are laughably stupid in their lack of detail, okay? And I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying, where's the evidence? And now we know that there are tools to create a false flag and blame somebody else. It's out there in these leaked documents. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, well, certainly this revelation with Vault 7 sort of changes that conversation when looking at the sort of possibility of a Russian hack on the U.S. Elections or the DNC. With the Umbrage program, which was detailed in this leak, the ability to do a false flag hack, basically, and to plant evidence that would sort of implicate somebody who didn't actually do the hack. That's all there detailed in this document. But more than that, you talk about being above the law, above oversight. Between the NSA, between the CIA, between GCHQ, between any of these other handoff intelligence organizations, this is kind of like a syndicate. It's almost like an organized crime syndicate that operates completely on its own. Very little oversight, and in what kind of oversight can you have with something that scale? And then on the commercial side, you have this sort of not reporting vulnerabilities to manufacturers and leaves the consumer vulnerable to all sorts of hacks, and the CIA's leaving some of this off-the-shelf stuff, which is intentionally unclassified. That's also detailed in the Vault 7. That creates this kind of, again, this protection racket in the commercial sphere with virus protection that isn't actually effective anyway. So, who's the loser at the end of the day? It's the consumer, or it's the voter, or the citizen in this case. I think America has to accept the reality that we are reaching peak freedom. You've heard of peak oil. That maybe we should talk about this new term, call it peak freedom, because this is what this sort of technology or this sort of ability by the state indicates, is that we are reaching our sort of apogee in terms of freedom.
Suzanne, right as we were sitting down to do this program here, Julian Assange was giving an address, some kind of brief briefing with, I don't know if it was with the media, I don't know if it was probably being telecast and people were watching it. And just as I was sitting down here, my editor told me that MSNBC was carrying it, and then it cut it off after a minute, and they decided to have a panel of people to discuss what Julian Assange, well, they weren't listening to what he had to say. They were talking about him here. Do you find that troubling here? I mean, irrespective of what you think of Julian Assange, this is a big story here. Shouldn't the public hear why he's doing this and why he thinks is important? Then you can disagree with him instead of just censoring him like that? Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I'm not aware of the incident that you specified, but my sense is not that he's been censored. He got this information out into the public. WikiLeaks framed it. They explained what they were trying to do, what they were releasing, what they weren't releasing.
He was trying to tell. He was trying to tell the world. He was trying to tell the world why he was doing this. Don't you think that's worth listening to?
But he has many methods to do that. Whether he does that, what networks air that.
It was live. It was live.
But I think this story has been, well, I have to say, I didn't see that clip, so I can't address why they cut him off. I really can't comment on that, but I do think as the story has come out, WikiLeaks has been able to make its position quite clear. When I came into this room, I couldn't hear what Assange was saying, but he was on a monitor in this room being broadcast. So my sense is he's getting that story out.
Larry, what do you think about that? Because it seems to me, again, when we started out the program here, is that the mainstream media is just putting it into a certain spectrum. They want to look at a certain angle of it, not addressing some of the issues that we've already talked about on this program. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, this may sound a tad extreme, but I remember the days when I was involved at the CIA with what was described as covert action and information operations, where and when you have a story to tell, you want to get that message out there and help shape that message. And, I witnessed very clearly in which we were able to try to do that overseas. What I've been watching here in the United States is there has been a decided anti-Russian propaganda campaign that is underway, both to portray Donald Trump as a stooge of the Russians, a puppet of Putin, as well as to portray Russia as this great and growing threat, a menace that we must now rally around to defeat and to defend against. And it's genuinely frightening that unless you have unless your point of view conforms with what's in the editorial control of those who direct both the radio, television, and newspaper outlets, there's deliberate efforts to try to silence those voices. And so this is, I think there's sort of almost a collective decision to studiously.
Okay.
Well, I can give you example after example of, here's one clear example. Just 2 weeks ago, we heard in the United States about, oh my God, Russia's got a spy ship off the east coast of the United States. I don't recall a single outlet describing the fact that the United States was conducting naval military exercises in the Black Sea, as well as in Romania, as well as in the Baltics, as well as in Poland, with both ground troops and naval forces. Instead, the only one I saw was on Fox News. They showed a Russian plane buzzing a Navy ship, implying that Russia was doing something outrageous, with no comment whatsoever about what was actually going on. What the United States was doing, when viewed from a Russian perspective, would show it was in fact a provocative action. How would the United States react if Russia was conducting military exercises on our borders in Canada, Mexico, and just off our coast? We would be alarmed. And the fact that the collective media chose to go that route, to me, I can't imagine that it's just because they're stupid.
Okay, Suzanne, you want to